If you were looking for a white Christmas, I don't know what to tell you. This is not good news. The snow depth chart does show that many areas of the U.S. are bare. Just the Rockies, North Dakota, and New England seeing any significant snowfall on the ground. Weather extremes around the world the past 24 hours. The hot spot is Fitzroy Crossing. No longer the hot spots are down here. They've shifted back into the northwest. 114 degrees there. And we always like to look around on Google Street View. And looks like we caught it on a cloudy day. So that's that region, another outback town. And at the other extreme, minus 55 at Kurbo, Russia. Kurbo, that sounds like some sort of 80s arcade game. I can tell you one thing, that is a remote area. That's not too far from Tunguska, where they had that meteor strike 100 years ago. But that is Kurbo, nothing there. The Department of Defense topographic charts have pretty much nothing there. So the Google Street View images, those are very limited. We'll give you a view from Tura just to the north. So that area is going to look something like that, very scenic. Probably some good hunting in there, good fishing. Our climate indicators today, indicative of high momentum in the atmosphere. Everything is in the positive. The East Pacific Oscillation was quite high a couple of days ago. That is trending down, but lots of flow through the Central Pacific into the East Pacific, and that's helping to prime that El Nino pattern we've got on the West Coast. And this is what we're talking about. We were seeing a high differential between the trough and ridge right here. It was up to about 700 meters back on Wednesday, and that's diminishing since both areas are in this trough. But you can see over the next few days, lots of flow coming through the Pacific and a cutoff low off of the California coast that will be affecting them early next week. And a series of additional waves and troughs continue to affect California and the Pacific Northwest for the next week or two. And that's quite a doozy there coming in between Christmas and New Year's. Scoping out things around the U.S. this afternoon. How do we read this? Well, let's go over all the different features. We have an outgoing polar high centered on the Appalachians, producing some northeasterly flow through the southeast U.S. You can see temperatures there in the upper 50s and 60s. The tropical air located well to the south, out there in South Texas, and it looks kind of like a transitional zone because you could call that a front. Temperatures around 70 in Houston, contrasting with 50s and 60s to the northeast. But we get into 80s around Brownsville. And even down in Mexico, looks like some cool flow, a little bit of upslope producing drizzle at Monterey. So it appears there's yet another front further to the south, and that's going to put Florida on the north side of that boundary there. So just off the south side, a secondary front. So a little bit of a complex picture. But on the backside, Pacific air flowing into West Texas. You can see the flow is out of the north. At least there's a northerly component in Arizona and New Mexico. And even at Las Vegas. Well, I don't have a wind indicator there, but it does look like it's cold. Temperatures in the mid-50s. And at Los Angeles, northerly flow. So we take a look out there. We see that there's a 1032 millibar high, which actually puts about 1034 right there in the center. Winnemucca, that's our benchmark for Santa Ana conditions. They're at about 1033 versus 1020 to 1022 at Los Angeles. That's about 12 to 13 millibars of difference, so that is favoring enhanced winds, at least through part of California. Sandberg, near one of the passes, reporting 31 knots, but most all the other stations looking a little bit weaker in the 10 to 15 knot range. A lot of the true cold air is up there in Quebec and Ontario. Blizzard warnings from Ungava Bay across Hudson Bay and down towards James Bay. Pretty much right from here all the way up. Those are under blizzard warnings through Saturday. Snow showers across Quebec with the strong cold air advection coming in from the northwest. And out there in the Canadian prairies looking rather mild. In British Columbia, near this Pacific front, we do have a few snowfall warnings around Prince George, around Bella Coola, which is somewhere in this area here, and around Stewart. And you can see that there is a plume of moisture right there along that boundary. Further north in Alaska, we did have blizzard warnings along the southeast coast that runs from about Iliamna to Dillingham and Bethel. They were looking for east winds up to 40 miles an hour and 7 inches of snow, and that's diminished some. For now, gale warnings from about Haines out towards the Gulf of Alaska. Those run through Tuesday night. We are seeing some very cold air up there in the Canadian high Arctic. Minus 20s around Resolute up to minus 27 at Eureka. And down along the former dew line down to about minus 15 with blustery northwest winds. Looking at the jet stream chart this evening, it does show split flow. One band of very strong winds from the Aleutians across northern Canada and through Quebec into the North Atlantic. The southern stream near these cutoff lows, one of them off of California, that will become significant as we get into Saturday and Sunday. The other low right there in the central U.S. and another band extending off the Carolinas. And let's take a look at the mid-tropospheric dynamics up at 500 millibars. This is going to be for this evening. So we do have an upper low across Kansas with flow around the base of the trough. Big ridge across the western U.S. and across the east coast as well. But as we go into this weekend, some big changes along the Gulf Coast. Here we can see a jet max diving across the San Antonio area, entering the Gulf, and leaking up with a big low-pressure area developing just west of Florida. So this is going to come together. We're going to look at the surface chart so you can get a better look at that, and that'll track right up the coast into Monday and Tuesday. And in behind it, a second wave. This will be working with less moisture, so even though we have stronger upper air dynamics, the precip will not be as extensive. And we are definitely working with some extensive moisture for this time of year, most of it well to the south, the 1.5-inch precipitable water from about Miami to just off of Corpus Christi. Going into Saturday and Sunday, we start seeing a 2-inch plume up there near Fort Myers up to about Vero Beach, and 1.5 up to Jacksonville. And that 1.5 will track pretty far to the north going into Sunday. This is pretty unusual for this time of year. 1.5 precipitable water. That's like a late spring type pattern. That nose coming into Richmond, into Delaware, and almost touching Long Island. So this is going to be Sunday night. There's the main upper level low, lagging behind the main baroclinic region. And then going into later Monday, things rapidly move into the Maritimes. So you can see that Tuesday, there's a large upper level low across Pennsylvania, strong dynamics. However, just not very much moisture to work with. Very stormy in the Gulf of Mexico this afternoon. There's Florida, there's the Gulf Coast, and numerous convective elements from Florida out to the Yucatan. Now, this weather system that we're dealing with actually bears some resemblance to the so-called storm of the century back in 1993, frontal boundary through the Gulf of Mexico, and a developing wave. The very next day, you can see what came together across Florida and into Georgia, and then that tracked right up the coast. But that was a very deep and powerful weather system. So here's what we've got going on this weekend. And I did pile on a few more isobars here. This is every 1 millibar. And that's more to just kind of show you the structure of this weather system. So down here we have a stationary front. You can see a wave developing north of the Yucatan. And then tomorrow morning, We've got our closed low approaching Tampa. By noon, it looks like this. And I think at this point, we've probably got a warm front moving across the Everglades. You can see a slight difference in the wind, and that probably will provide an area of enhanced shear along that warm front. So by 3 p.m., some sort of boundary lifting through Tampa, and then by 6 p.m. through Orlando. So the SPC slight risk focuses mostly on this area right here, but I would not be surprised to see a few severe storms further to the north. Looks like we're starting to get that dry slot working across the state, so improving conditions around midnight. But you can see there on the Georgia coast and the Carolinas, the winds really picking up there. And this shows you the progression of that system up the coast. That's going to be Sunday evening, 989 millibar low across North Carolina, and then the main wind threats shifting up into the northeastern U.S. Some cold, blustery northwesterly winds on the backside, and I would not be surprised to see maybe a few snow flurries in the higher elevations of the Appalachians. So SPC looking for a slight risk, basically from Orlando southward. Shear profiles will be enhanced Saturday with curved photographs, but the degree of instability and the mode of storm organization is unclear right now. So let's do that quick run through of the cross-section, starting out with the Atlantic and working our way west. We start out with cold air across the Atlantic, and you can see some packed isotropes, the black lines. What does that mean? Well, maybe this will help you out a bit. Here we can see a skew-t with cold air steep lapse rates in the lowest 5,000 feet. This is associated with strong modification of cold air over warmer waters. So we're heating from the bottom up. Above that, an inversion, and that transitions into the tropical air. So this right here, that's a frontal transition zone. The cold air down in this region right here, and the tropical air above. And if we compare that with the cross-section, there's our inversion. And you can see through that inversion, if you look at the isotherms, there's a little bit of flip-flopping going on. We ascend into cold air, and then ascend into warm air, and then back into cold air once again. So the isotherms get a little bit weird. The isotropes make it easier to see what's going on because they never flip-flop like that. That can only happen in absolutely unstable air, and we never see that on the synoptic scale charts. So where you have packing, that's going to be the inversion, and another inversion up there near the top representing the stratosphere. That's that layer right there. And where the isotropes are far apart, such as down here and in here, that's going to be steeper lapse rates, more unstable air. And indeed, the skew-t line is tilted over to the left in both regions. And with that, the isotherms are packed very close together. All right, so maybe that will help answer a few of your questions and maybe create a few more of them to go with that. But anyway, maybe this will get you off to a good start with those cross sections. Okay, so that frontal inversion right there, about 6,000 or 7,000 feet. Okay, we move on to the East Coast. We can see a couple of upper level fronts, one right there, supporting that jet. That's going to be over Georgia, maybe Florida. And we start picking up some upper level moisture. The gray areas indicate higher relative humidity, so that supports clouds and rain. There's another gray area. The blue area is higher dew points or higher mixing ratio, and that corresponds to higher precipitable water, especially if it's through a deep layer. Okay, so they are two different things. The bluish is sort of like sultry air, and the gray is cloudy air. In the northern latitudes, not sultry, but definitely have moisture and clouds up there in the Great Lakes region. Okay, heading west, we start getting into that active weather area around Texas. Start to pick up clouds. Don't see much in the way of fronts, maybe a weak little mid-level front right there. And it starts to take definition as we move into Oklahoma and Texas. There it is, possibly extending down to the surface around Austin or San Antonio. And then we lose definition as we move into the higher areas of Texas and Oklahoma. All right, heading into the Rockies, there they are. We start to see some trapped cold air in the Great Basin region. See that right there? That's cold air close to the ground. That's part of that big plateau high complex across Idaho, Nevada, and Utah. And then heading out into the Pacific, we pick up the marine layer off of the California coast. Looks like it's been eroded due to that northeasterly flow around Los Angeles and San Francisco. And we reached the coast. And that brings our cross-section to an end. And I'll give you the east-west cross-section, and I'll just kind of zip through this really quickly. You can see some cold air there across Colorado and Kansas. The isotopes are bubbled up right in that region. And on the edge, that's going to be that frontal transition zone in Kansas. As we go further north, trapped air in the Great Basin region. That's that part of the chart. And then heading into the northern U.S., more cold air. The isotopes gradually lift. Big cold air mass across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Montana, and North Dakota. And we reach the end of the chart. So let's look at the weather for your part of the country as we go into the weekend. For Saturday, that's going to be the evening conditions. Some showers moving through Chicago, Indianapolis, and meanwhile in the southeastern U.S., plenty of weather in Florida. Can see a little bit of lee side troughing in Montana. Downslope flow tries to get set up in the Texas Panhandle, and the plateau high continues to remain anchored across Idaho, Utah, and West Colorado. Going into Sunday, coastal low moving up through the Carolinas and that band of high precipitable water coming on shore around New Jersey. On the other side, a strong wave moving down through the Midwest, strong cold air advection across Minnesota and Wisconsin. So that's going to be that second push coming back in behind the coastal low, pretty much dovetailing right in there in the dry slot. And there it comes, moving through Indiana and Ohio for early Monday and through the remainder of the northeastern U.S. for late Monday. And that will be a very cold and windy day in that part of the country, especially through the Appalachians, and there's some of those snow flurries in West Virginia. So that'll affect mostly the northeastern U.S. Meanwhile, in the central U.S., warm southerly flow coming up through the Great Plains, and then going into Tuesday, starting to get that moisture coming into California. This will be a prolonged period of warm air advection, so the snow levels will be up to about 9,000 feet initially, and then dropping to about 6,000 by Wednesday. So as we go into Wednesday, return flow through the central U.S., cold front starting to come on shore there in California. There's Thursday and then Friday and then Saturday. Looks like a wet period in the southern U.S., very classic El Nino type pattern. And then we get to the end of the sequence, a weak push of cold air coming south, and that's only 1030 millibars, so I'm not expecting that to do very much. However, that brings us to our first Christmas chart. That's going to be Christmas morning. So the only place getting any snow, Nebraska. Meanwhile, a strong Pacific system approaching the northwestern U.S. And I'll give you a better look at that. There you go. That's some interesting activity there off of Oregon. Closing out our Friday edition with some great aerial footage thanks to Greg out there in the Texas Hill Country. Just as a reminder, you can help support this program by picking up a copy of a forecasting book title or some software at weathergraphics.com. All of your purchases at weathergraphics.com help support this program, and there's the address for that. We'll be back once again on Monday for the Patreon supporters and on Wednesday for everybody else. Hope you have a great weekend. Take care, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.